The beginnings of any Mando kit is the vest. If the vest doesn't fit properly, or is sloppy and or poorly constructed, it's going to create problems. How do I know this? Let's just say I've been there. So if you haven't seen the other video where I do the retrospective on the things that did and didn't work for their kits, I'll put a link up in the corner. That way you're at least caught up on why we went from duck cloth to leather. Now, on to the leather. This was the first time that we had ever tried to sew leather. We ran into a few problems. Some of the problems were with the pattern, some of the problems were with our technique on sewing leather. The first pattern related problem that we had was on the sides. I was trying to get a line that would hug the body and the plates on the thing, and what I ended up with was something that was almost impossible to sew with leather without it puckering and creating a problem. I don't think it's going to be a big deal because I think I'm going to be able to cover it with plates. If I can't, then I will leather it and make it part of the kit. The second problem that we had was we sewed this vest with a lightweight Brother SE400 sewing machine and an aftermarket walking foot. It did okay until we got to any sort of major step up in material where you sew over a seam or something like that, and then it just completely stopped. I spent a lot of time undoing the machine, cutting threads out, putting threads back in, rethreading needles, buying new needles. It didn't go quite as well as we were hoping to, but with patience and time, we did get through it. I'm overall pretty happy with it. I've still got a little bit more cleanup work to do on the bottoms and stuff like that, but I wanted to make sure that I put on the girth belt and everything before I cut anything down. I feel like it fits well enough that it's going to work fine for the plates, and I think it's going to keep the plates positioned where they need to be, and hopefully this one will last longer than the duck cloth one did.
This is an entire hide of 2-ounce chrome tanned leather. We chose chrome tanned because it was softer, more supple, hopefully easier to make something durable, but still not overly stiff. But at the same time, it will also resist staining and wearing and stuff like that a little better than veg tanned leather. The downside being that it can only be the color that it is. It's pretty hard, if not impossible, to dye this stuff. I say impossible. It can be done, but it's a lot of work. Laid this thing out, and as most efficiently as I could, I laid the patterns from the duct tape vest onto the leather and traced it out with a purple Sharpie. I don't know why purple, but just cuz. And then started cutting it out with a combination of scissors, a roller cutter, and a utility knife. Stuff cuts fairly easily, but any leather is actually pretty hard on whatever edge you're using, so kind of keep an eye on your edge. When you start to hear it cutting, it's probably time to replace it. And once I had the front and back cut out of the pieces, I traced a single side and then flipped it over and traced it again so that I would have one for the left and one for the right. Once I had everything cut out, I put the walking foot that we ordered for this machine on. This is the one we used for the SE400. Not as good as a real walking foot machine, but it worked well enough to get us through. And so I started with the edges, the shoulders and area around the arms. I just folded a little bit of material that I had left when I made the pattern for seam allowances, folded it over, and I took my time and fed it through the machine carefully. The walking foot didn't work if it moved very fast, and it didn't work in reverse, so I kind of had to adjust the best I could. I then laid it out on the table, made sure that everything was even and symmetrical, and sewed one of the shoulders closed with the vest inside out. And the other shoulder gets a strip of Velcro so that I can open up the shoulder and get in and out of the vest easily. I tried a piece of double-sided sticky tape to help hold the Velcro in place while I sewed it because it was incredibly difficult to pin this stuff. It took a little bit of help from Bellatrix, but I eventually got it in place and got at least one edge sewn so I can test it to make sure it fits, make sure it works. And with the shoulders sewn closed and the seams rolled over on the arms, I started sewing the sides together. I had allowed fairly generous seam allowances, but I started off sewing as close to the edge as I could so that I had room for adjustment as I needed to test fit it. Once I had everything sewn together, I put it on, and my wife used a red Sharpie, which was different than the color I'd originally drawn, to kind of lay out the areas where the vest was too loose so that I could sew along those lines to tighten the vest up. And what she did was just pinch the material together and then draw the lines where it needed to be. I then laid it out on the machine very carefully and tried to line up with holes and lines that started before that, and then just worked my way along the new red lines, and before I stopped the machine, I tried to sew down onto the previous sewing seam just a little bit. And I finally had it mostly together. I laid it flat out on the table and measured the side pieces to just make sure that they were centered. Once I had everything squared up, I cut a couple of reference marks at the top, and then it was on to removing the extra material at the bottom. When I cut the pieces for the back and the sides, I left them a little long, simply because I wasn't as confident in the length of the pattern as I wanted to be, but the front was a good indicator, so I ended up cutting everything the same length as the front. But with it laid out on the table, a couple reference marks, some straight edges, some scissors, had everything cut down to the approximate size, then turned the thing inside out and made a line right down the center using the two little snips at the top and the bottom as a reference. And I did that on both sides. Double checking to make sure I was allowing myself enough room to overlap, I pinned everything together and sewed up the edges, and I'm going to punch grommets in these, so I wanted them a double layer thick. That way they would be plenty sturdy when I was pulling on them with the grommet. As I progressed, I learned two things. One, I figured out how to pin this stuff, and two, I learned how to sew just a little faster. And here's where I made my first major mistake. When I was punching the grommets, I measured from the bottom and fairly evenly spaced them. I didn't think I was going to have to go all the way up to the area under the arm, but as it turns out, I needed to go all the way up to the area under the arm, and I didn't space the grommets accordingly. It worked out okay, but I should have started at the underarm and just planned on spacing the entire thing. Live and learn. And these are just grommets that I picked up at Walmart or Hobby Lobby, any combination of thing. They're the large eyelets, and by the little setter, I have found that they're easier to set sitting on a hard surface like tile or something like that. But once I had everything measured and marked, I just would flip the piece over and compare the two sides, use those as reference, and then fold the sides together, use those as reference, and punch an entire row and set an entire row. Did that make any sense at all? I'm not sure that made any sense. No. Anyways. I use these grommets a fair bit, and one of the things that I've discovered is if you're going to buy them, buy a couple packages of them, because they do not come equitably distributed. By that I mean, if there's 40 pieces in there, it's seldom 20 tops and 20 bottoms. It's usually like 17 tops and 23 bottoms, or some bizarre, unusable combination that leaves half of them next to useless.
So, if you're watching any of the other Mandalorian videos, I'm all over the place. A couple weeks ago I was working on the schnees, then the vest, and other things, and all sorts of pieces. I am midway through getting my wife's kit finished for Dragon Con. My son's kit hasn't quite been started yet, and I'm still working on mine, and my bucket's not done. So, yeah, I got a lot of stuff to do before Dragon Con, which is coming up in a couple months. We'll see you next week.